Do you remember when portable gaming wasn't something you downloaded? It was something you carried. This was the age before smartphones, before social media, before every little screen fit inside your pocket. There was a time when leaving the house meant making one very important decision: which game or games were coming with you. That suddenly made road trips feel a lot shorter, having to wait in waiting rooms wasn't so boring, and long car rides turned into huge Pokemon adventures, Mario races, and one more attempt at beating that impossible level before the battery finally gave out. For millions of us growing up in the early 2000s, this wasn't just another piece of technology. It was a childhood companion, and even today, more than 2 decades later, all it takes is one familiar click, and suddenly, you're a kid again. So today, ladies and gents, we're doing something a little different. We're taking a trip down memory lane. Instead of reviewing the Game Boy Advance SP through a modern 2026 lens, we're instead going to travel back in time and review it exactly as if it had just hit store shelves back then in 2003. Then, once our review is over, we'll return to the present day using our time machine to see if this little handheld still deserves a place in your collection 23 years later. So what do you guys say? Let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, ladies and gents, Nintendo has finally done it. After 2 years with the original Game Boy Advance, they've completely redesigned their handheld, and this right here is the brand new Game Boy Advance SP. Now, right off the rip, there are some pretty significant improvements over the original Game Boy Advance, lots of them. The first, and probably the most noticeable, is this all-new clamshell design. Not only does it make the system feel a lot more premium, but it also helps protect the screen whenever you're not using it, and that's a big plus. It's smaller, easier to carry around, very easily palmable, and honestly, it just feels like a much more refined handheld. Nintendo is launching the SP in 2 different colors, that being cobalt blue and platinum silver. Today we're taking a look at the cobalt blue model. Although in the future, I do hope they have more color variety. But I do gotta say, as nice as the redesign is, that's not even the biggest improvement. Because for the first time ever on a Game Boy Advance, Nintendo has finally added a built-in front lit screen. Let's get a round of applause. Finally! If you've ever owned the original Game Boy Advance or some of the older Game Boy Colors, then you already know just how difficult it could be to play in a dimly lit room or on a long car ride after the sun went down. Then I would always have my dad screaming at me to turn off the light because he was going to get pulled over or something. I don't even know if that's accurate. Anyway, with the SP, that's finally a thing of the past, and it completely changes the whole experience. Being able to flip on the light and keep playing almost anywhere is easily one of the biggest reasons to upgrade here. Now, once you get past that redesigned look, it's the little improvements that really start to stand out. Let's start with the controls. Very familiar here. If you spent any time with the original Game Boy Advance, you'll feel right at home. The D-pad is just as responsive, very clicky. The A and B buttons feel great, so do select and start, and Nintendo has managed to keep the familiar layout while making the entire system noticeably more compact. Even the shoulder buttons have a nice satisfying click to them, making action games and racers feel just as comfortable to play. But without question, one of the biggest upgrades has nothing to do with the controls. It's the battery. Previous Game Boy systems relied on disposable AA batteries, which meant eventually making another trip to the store whenever they ran out of juice. And if you're a big gamer like me, that was often. This time around, Nintendo has replaced them with a built-in rechargeable lithium-ion battery, and honestly, it's one of the best improvements they've made to date. Nintendo estimates you'll get up to 10 hours of gameplay with the front light turned on, or an impressive 18 hours if you leave the light off. For a handheld gaming system, that's more than enough to get you through long road trips, family vacations, or just about any gaming session you can throw at it. So whenever that light turns red on you, you already know, turn off the light to conserve as much battery as you can. Until you can get to your charger again, of course. Build quality also deserves some praise. The hinge feels extremely sturdy when opening and closing the system, giving you confidence that it'll hold up to everyday use. There is one small downside though. Unlike previous Game Boy systems, there's no standard headphone jack built into the SP itself. It is a nitpick, but if you want to plug in a pair of headphones, you'll need Nintendo's optional headphone adapter, which is a bit of an inconvenience and an extra step. It's an extra accessory to keep track of. Lame, I know. But still, That's a pretty minor complaint considering everything else Nintendo has improved. So far, the Game Boy Advance SP feels less like a simple refresh and more like the handheld the original Game Boy Advance always was meant to be. Okay, so the redesigned hardware is very impressive, but let's get back to that screen, because like I said, Nintendo has finally addressed people's biggest problems. So this is the first time in a Game Boy Advance that we feature a front lit display. That's super awesome, and it's immediately noticeable. With the simple press of that button, you can illuminate the screen and continue playing in places that would have been nearly impossible on the original Game Boy Advance. It's one of those features that after using it for just a few minutes, it makes you wonder how you ever lived without it. That said, it isn't perfect. While the front light is a massive improvement, it can still produce a bit of glare depending on your viewing angle, especially outdoors on a really sunny day, and it's not quite as bright as you might expect in every situation. Indoors, perfectly fine, but whenever you're outside, that's when things get a little murky. But it's a huge leap forward over the original Game Boy Advance, but there are still moments where you wish the display had just a little bit more brightness. Even so, there's no denying that this is the feature that transforms the entire experience, no doubt. More than the new design, more than the rechargeable battery, the built-in light makes the Game Boy Advance SP feel like the handheld Nintendo should have released from the very beginning. Of course, none of these improvements would matter if the games were trash. Thankfully, that's never really been a problem for Nintendo. One of the best things about the Game Boy Advance SP is that it doesn't introduce a brand new library of games. Instead, thankfully, it plays the entire Game Boy Advance catalog that's already available, giving you access to some of the best handheld titles ever made. Whether you're racing through Mario Kart Super Circuit, catching Pokemon in Ruby and Sapphire, exploring the world of The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past and Four Swords, or battling your way through Metroid Fusion, there's already no shortage of incredible games to choose from. But there's one feature I think deserves its own spotlight. One of the smartest decisions Nintendo made with the Game Boy Advance SP was keeping full compatibility with older Game Boy games, and this is a huge W for us gamers. That means if you spent years building a library of Game Boy or Game Boy Color titles, you won't have to leave them behind or sell them. Take this copy of Pokemon Yellow for example. Even though it originally launched years before the Game Boy Advance SP, all you have to do is slide the cartridge into the system, power it on, and you're right back where you left off. Now of course, the cartridge does jut out a little bit, so ergonomics do change, but still, that's a decent drawback. It's a feature that not only saves players money, but also preserves years of gaming memories on a single handheld. Whether you're diving into the latest Game Boy Advance releases or revisiting classics from the original Game Boy era, the Game Boy Advance SP brings everything together into one complete package. And that's what makes it feel like more than just a hardware upgrade. It's a celebration of everything Nintendo has built over the past decade of handheld gaming. Of course, no system is perfect. The front lit screen, while a massive improvement, still isn't flawless, and having to purchase a separate adapter just to use standard headphones feels like an odd decision, especially coming from Nintendo. But neither of these issues is enough to overshadow everything this handheld gets right. If you already own a Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Advance SP feels like a worthwhile upgrade. And if you've somehow been waiting to jump into Nintendo's latest handheld, there's never been a better place to start. For me, the Game Boy Advance SP earns a strong recommendation. It takes everything that made the original Game Boy Advance great, improves nearly every aspect of the experience, and delivers one of the most polished handheld systems Nintendo has ever released. My final verdict, I give this thing a 9.5 out of 10. Now, that wraps everything up. Tell me what you guys think. Now, if you'll excuse me though, I do have to finish beating the Elite Four, so I'll catch you all later. Alright, so 23 years later, the Game Boy Advance SP is no longer Nintendo's newly handheld, obviously. Since its release, we've seen countless advancements in gaming. Today's systems offer breathtaking graphics, online multiplayer, downloadable content, massive open worlds, and entire game libraries that can be downloaded in just a matter of minutes. Sitting here in 2026, it's almost surreal placing the Game Boy Advance SP beside something like the Nintendo Switch or even my iPhone. On paper, there's simply no comparison. Modern devices are way more powerful in every measurable way. But here's the funny thing. That doesn't automatically make this thing any less fun. In fact, I think that's exactly why so many people still come back to it. I'm only 7 years older than this console, and at 30, I sometimes feel incredibly fortunate to have grown up during one of the most fascinating transitions in gaming history. Millennials and older members of Gen Z experienced a childhood that existed in two completely different worlds. We remember a time before social media consumed our attention. before day one patches, before downloadable content, before battle passes and live service games, before every game expected you to create an online account the moment you turned it on. When you bought a game back then, that was the game. Developers had one opportunity to get it right, and players spent months, if not years, discovering every secret hidden on the cartridge. There was something incredibly satisfying about that simplicity. But the Game Boy Advance SP reminds us that sometimes less truly is more. No notifications, no updates waiting to download, no internet connection required, just you, a game cartridge, and however many hours of battery life you had left. And honestly, that experience still holds up remarkably well. Of course, the games themselves weren't the only thing that made the Game Boy Advance SP memorable. It was also the little quirks of the era that came with it. Take these for example, Game Boy Advance video cartridges. As strange as it sounds today, Nintendo actually released cartridges that let you watch episodes of your favorite TV shows right on your Game Boy Advance SP. Pokemon, SpongeBob SquarePants, Dragon Ball GT, Codename Kids Next Door, even Shrek. At a time when smartphones didn't exist and portable DVD players were still a luxury for many families, being able to toss a couple of TV episodes into your backpack felt like something straight out of the future. Looking back now though, the video quality definitely hasn't aged well. It's like 240p, if not less. But somehow, that's part of the charm. If you get stuck on a level, there wasn't always a YouTube walkthrough waiting to save you. Sometimes you figured it out by yourself. Sometimes you asked a friend at school the next morning, and if you were truly desperate like I was, maybe you convinced your parents to buy you the official strategy guide so you could finally make it past that impossible section. Even the rumors became part of the adventure. Every school seemed to have that one kid whose older brother supposedly knew every secret in every game. Somebody swore on their mama that Mew was hiding underneath the truck near the SS Anne. Someone else claimed that there was a hidden way to unlock Luigi in Super Mario 64. Most of it wasn't true, but honestly, that almost didn't even matter. Those rumors sparked conversations on the playground. It fueled our imaginations and gave us one more reason to rush home after school just to see if maybe, just maybe, this one was real. The Game Boy Advance SP wasn't just a handheld. It was part of an entire gaming culture that existed before answers were only a search away. And looking back, I think the mystery made those adventures even more memorable. Now come to think of it, I don't think what I missed most about the Game Boy Advance SP is actually the console itself. I miss everything that came with it. I miss tearing the plastic wrap off a brand new game, opening that case for the very first time, and spending the entire car ride home reading the instruction manual because they used to include those things, you know, and I simply couldn't wait to start playing once I finally got home close to my charger. I miss lending a game to a friend and trusting that eventually it'd find its way back to me. And dare I say it, I definitely miss hearing one simple sentence at school. Hey dude, bring your Game Boy tomorrow. That was all anyone had to say. Say no more, bro. No group chats, no Discord servers, no calendar invites, just 4 words. And somehow, everybody knew exactly what tomorrow was going to look like. Maybe it was trading Pokemon. Maybe it was battling to see who had trained a stronger team. Maybe it was taking turns on a level one of your friends just couldn't beat and you knew how to beat it. Whatever it was, you just had to be there. Also, there were some accessories that made the experience a lot better. For example, the Game Link cable was not just an accessory, it was a reason to sit shoulder to shoulder with your friends. That meant you could then trade your Pokemon while sitting on the same couch. Revolutionary at the time, of course. Years later, Nintendo introduced the wireless adapter, and if I'm not mistaken, the only reason I found out about that accessory was because it was on the box of Fire Red and Leaf Green, I believe. Anyway, at that time, it felt like something straight out of science fiction as well. Trading and battling without a cable? What? That was almost unheard of. It seemed impossible. But even then, the person you were playing with was still sitting right beside you. It wasn't like you could battle someone over in Cairo or in Tokyo. But that's something I don't think we appreciate enough. Today, we can instantly connect with people from all over the world, and honestly, that is an incredible thing. Some of my closest gaming memories now happen with friends who live hundreds if not thousands of miles away, but there was something special about sharing the same couch. Passing the Game Boy back and forth with Cheeto crust on your fingers, celebrating a successful Pokemon trade like it was the biggest accomplishment in the world. Those moments couldn't be downloaded, they couldn't be patched in later, they simply happened. And maybe that's why they still mean so much to me. Because when I think back on the Game Boy Advance SP, I don't remember how many hours the battery lasted, I don't remember the specs or how many pixels were on the screen, I remember the people, I remember the laughter, I remember the conversations, I remember being a kid. And I think that's what I've been missing all along. As I sit here looking at the Game Boy Advance SP one last time, I realized this review was never really about the hardware. It wasn't about the screen either, nor the battery, or even the games. It was about remembering a chapter of life that can never be recreated, only revisited. Technology has come such a long way since 2003. Today's consoles are faster, more powerful, and capable of experiences we could only dream of back then. And that's a wonderful thing. Gaming has continued to evolve, and so have we. But every once in a while, it's nice to slow down, to dust off an old handheld, to hear that familiar startup sound, because I mean, who doesn't remember, for example, the PS2 startup sound? Legendary. To remember a version of ourselves that saw every new game as an adventure and every afternoon as a chance to make another memory way before we had to worry about bills, way before we had to worry about car maintenance. Maybe that's why this little handheld still means so much to so many people. The Game Boy Advance SP didn't create our childhoods, it simply became part of them. It was there during some of the happiest years of our lives, and because of that, every time we hear that little click for just a moment, we're home again. So, ladies and gents, thank you for taking this journey back with me, and thank you for watching. Oh, you're still here. Well, since you're still watching, I wanted to cover one final point. If you're thinking about picking up a Game Boy Advance SP in 2026, or maybe even years after watching this video, there are a few things I think you should know before spending your money. So, the system we've been looking at throughout this review is the AGS-001 model, which features Nintendo's original front-lit display. A couple of years later, though, Nintendo quietly released the AGS-101, which back then I wanted so badly, but my parents refused to upgrade it for me. And if you're unfamiliar with it, it's essentially the same Game Boy Advance SP, but with a significantly brighter backlit screen. If your goal is simply to enjoy Game Boy Advance games on original hardware, the AGS-101 is generally considered the definitive version to own. Beyond that, keep an eye on the condition of the screen, the battery, and whether the shell is original or an aftermarket replacement. Many SPs have been refurbished over the years, so taking a few extra minutes to inspect one before buying one can save you a lot of disappointment later. One thing I'd especially encourage you to watch out for is counterfeit game cartridges. Unfortunately, the Game Boy Advance market is flooded with reproductions, particularly for popular titles like Pokemon Emerald especially, Fire Red, Leaf Green, Ruby Sapphire, and The Legend of Zelda games, the Minish Cap to be specific. If you're shopping online or at a local game store, take a close look at the cartridge before buying. Authentic Game Boy Advance games usually have a clean, high-quality label with crisp printing, the word Nintendo molded into the plastic at the top of the cartridge, and a stamped production number pressed into the label itself. Many reproduction cartridges have blurry artwork, incorrect colors, poor quality plastics, missing stamp numbers, or labels that simply don't look quite right. If a seller is asking a suspiciously low price for a rare Pokemon game, that's usually a pretty good reason to take a closer look. And if you're ever unsure, don't be afraid to compare the cartridge against photos of a verified authentic copy before handing over your hard-earned money. Now, I really do mean it this time. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this retro review, I'd love to have you join us by subscribing. We're getting incredibly close to 100,000 subscribers, and reaching that milestone would truly mean the world to me. And if you'd like to continue the nostalgia, click the video card waiting at the top right. That's going to be my playlist for all of my other retro reviews, so definitely check those out. So guys, until next time, take care, and I cannot wait to catch you all in my next video.